Hi everybody, it's Alisa Murray here. Hi my sweet lifers. Listen, I've got a very special interview to do today, and the format's going to be a little bit awkward because I am on location in North Carolina and I am reading from my phone. Had a little bit of technical difficulties, but there's a Voices project that has done a Voices Oral History Center, and I want to participate, and the videographer was not able to be here because of COVID. And so this granddaddy right here that we're going to be talking to today is one of the granddaddies in my client base. I photograph all of his grandchildren. He's just had his 5th grandson in Houston, Texas, and they are from a part of North Carolina that I'm from. And so every time I come to visit family, I come to visit my family, my extended family, which is Pops.
There you go.
And Mom. And so we're going to do the questions today, and I'm going to have to read them with my readers because I'm getting old, but just bear with me and we'll get through them all. And so today, let me first off introduce you. This is Mr. Ernesto
Galvan,
and he is getting ready to be 89 years old on June the 20th.
Correct.
We think, winky face. He said that whenever he was going to visit his daddy when he was a young married man, every time they go visit his daddy, Donna, his wife, which I call Mom, would ask her father-in-law how old he was, and he'd always wink at her and say a little bit younger than the time they'd been to see him before. So we're going to go with the 89. I trust you that you're going to be 89 on June 20th, that you weren't pulling my leg.
Right.
Right. So anyway, all right, so now what I would like to do is I'm going to ask you, well, I'm going to say a few things that they're asking me for the project to actually read for this particular interview. So the conflict started, this is about the Korean War, okay?
Right.
The conflict started June 1950 when North Korea forces crossed the 38th parallel, the line separating North and South Korea. Action occurred just 5 years after end of World War II, at a time when U.S. government was in process of drastically scaling down the military. In addition to enlistments and the draft, the military also called up National Guard units. Many of these units were made up of men from similar backgrounds, such as Latinos from East Los Angeles. Even though the Korean War was only 5 years after World War II, there was a difference in the Latinos who served. There was more integration than in World War II. Some scholars say that for those of Mexican descent, the Korean War era was a transition between the Mexican Revolution generation and the Mexican American generation. The Korean War was the first significant Cold War conflict. Forces backed by Communist China and Soviet Union faced off against forces supported by the United States and other United Nations countries. After the initial invasion by North Korea, South Korean forces and a small number of U.S. advisors retreated to an area around port city of Pusan. U.S. forces led by General MacArthur landed at port of Incheon in September of 1950 and began to turn the tide. The U.S. forces pursued North Korea past 38 parallel and close to border with China, resulting in hundreds of thousands of Chinese forces crossing into Korea. Soldiers and Marines faced extreme climates, from stifling heat to bitter cold, that caused many casualties. War continued until 1953, when a truce was signed, but peace treaty has never been signed. U.S. troops continued to be stationed in Korea for decades after 1953. Okay, so now the next thing is I've got questions specifically to ask you about this. So tell me about your childhood and what your daily life was like.
Well, my childhood, I was at first I was at the ranch with my grandmother, and she kind of looked after me down in Cuero, Texas, DeWitt County, and she looked after me while my daddy was out working, and my mother, I guess they were. And then later on, as time moved on, my daddy moved to Brownsville, Texas, and Mama went with him. At that time, he built us the first house in Brownsville, Texas, in Van Buren Street, Brownsville. and that's where I started growing up. And after I was a certain age, which as a young kid, as a baby, when I was 2 years old, then I didn't remember nothing. This was just what they told me, you know. And I was brought up there at Brownsville, and when I got to be 6 years old, I went to Washington School, elementary, or what we called then grammar school.
Grammar school, yeah.
And after that, I started learning more English, but all we spoke in my house was Spanish.
Right.
And that's the language I knew, and my daddy and my mama taught me all the first colors and ABCs and all that in English. And when I went to Washington School, I had a hard time learning the English language because I had been raised speaking Spanish ever since. And as I grew up at school, Daddy was working for civil service in Fort Brown, Texas, in Brownsville.
Okay.
They had a fort there with cavalry, and I think it was the 7th Cavalry Regiment, and he went to work there at the Fort Brown as a maintenance man, and he's a good carpenter, and that was his livelihood.
Okay.
He did, he did all kinds of things, cabinets and all that, and worked on homes. But that's what he'd done over there. That was his job. And I continued to go with I had a stepmother then.
Oh, okay.
Right, because my father left my mother at that age, at 2 years old.
When you were 2.
Right, and my stepmother Anita, which was a Rodriguez, from the Rodriguez family in Corpus Christi, Texas. She's the one that raised me there until the war.
Okay.
World War II. And World War II came, and by then I must have been about 12 years old. So I knew more about what's going on. And Daddy went in the Navy. And at that time that my daddy went in the Navy, my stepmother took me to Corpus Christi, Texas.
Okay.
And that's when I started living in Corpus Christi, Texas until the war ended. But I attended Garcia Elementary School, grammar school. And then during the summer, several summers, when we had break from the school, I went to a ranch in Allen, Texas.
Okay.
Which is close to Kingsville, Texas.
Okay.
And there I stayed in the summertime, and I worked as a teenager rounding up cattle.
Wow.
And we also had a big 20 stalls for cows to get in, and it was also not only a ranch but a milk farm.
Okay.
And my uncle, one of my uncles from the Rodriguez family, he was a big foreman down there. He didn't own the ranch. He is a foreman, and I got paid $15 or $14 at that time. That was some money.
Yeah.
A week for that. But let me tell you what my job was.
What'd you do?
Besides rounding up cattle and bringing them in and getting them in the stalls, my job was the what do you call it, the doctor there,
Vet?
the vet that they had. he checked the cows and all that, and he stayed there. But anyway, he mixed this formula, in this big bucket.
Oh.
And it was a sterilization, not sterilization, but
Pasteurization.
Well, it was to keep germs away from, what do they call that? It wasn't Clorox, but it was,
Right.
because that would hurt the cows.
Right.
So, and then they gave me a big old sponge. My job was to go and clean and wash the udders.
Oh, you were cleaning the titties.
Right. That's right.
The titty cleaner.
Yeah, I was
titties.
it. And the first thing I had to learn was that the cows, milking cows, they didn't like that, and they would kick back and hurt you.
Oh.
But my uncle showed me how to do it. You take the tail and you make a U on the tail as you get down and you clean.
Right. And then they won't kick you.
They wouldn't kick.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And you was just watch them away, and that was my job. Watching the udders before the tenants came, the workers that came and put the machines on.
Yep, to milk them.
To milk them. And those things would go up and down, and that milk would be going in. And those cows would be eating in the stalls while they got, the silo and their feed. And they would be eating while they got, and as soon as the first batch went out, I'd go up to the gate and let some more in, and we had to count them. I had to count them. That was my job too. And they'd go in the stalls, and the workers would be there locking them in as soon as they got their heads stuck through the stuff and started eating. And then I'd get my bucket, and away we go.
Awesome.
So, it was a good job. I liked it, but that was during the summer while I was out of school. When school started, I'd go back to Corpus Christi, Texas, and go back to Garcia School over there. Garcia, which was named after Garcia Park. And that's the way I did until the war ended in 1945. And Daddy came home, and he served with the USS Lexington.
Okay.
Aircraft carrier, and he served all through the war until the end of it. And he was in bad shape when he came too. And after that, I went. Well, he took us back to Brownsville, Texas, and I went back to Brownsville, and I went and attended junior high by then. Let me tell you, I thought I was good, big stuff then.
I think everybody that's in junior high thinks they're big stuff.
Junior high down in Brownsville, Texas. And that was where the high school was too, where they had junior high and high school. And that's where I ended up again in school. And then after that, I started going to school, and I was working. When I got old enough, I started working myself to get a little money for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked after school. I was I worked in Cisneros. No, not Cisneros. What was the name? Well, anyway, I worked in a drugstore.
Okay.
I was a junior stock clerk, and what I did, I put medications and all that in, the counter
Right.
type, not drugs, but the counter. Right. And I stocked them up, and my job was to clean the floors and clean the glass outside, and I didn't do anything else but just take care of the place, And after that, I went to school. I mean, I'd go and earn me a little money, and then I'd go back to school again. And well, to cut it short, when the war started in Korea, which was June of 1950.
Yep.
Now I'll remember that. I went down to the recruiting station there in Brownsville, Texas, And I said, I want to volunteer. Well, they looked at me and they looked at me. And they left, the recruiting sergeant there laughed at me. And he says, I was real skinny. I was a skinny guy. I only had 24 inches around the waist. And he laughed at me. He says, hey, he says, when you pick up a little bit more weight, you can come back and see me then. And I said, but sir, why can't I? He said, how old are you? I said, well, I'm old enough. I'm 17. I'm going 18. I'll be 18 pretty soon. He said, when will you be 18? I said, June. He said, well, I don't know. He says, we're going to have somebody to sign for you. You know, you're 17, but you're close to being 18. Mm-hmm. So he said, you're going to have somebody to sign. I went and told my daddy. And my daddy told me, he says, you want to do what? I said, I want to volunteer for the Army. I want to join the Army now. He said, let me tell you, son, they're not going to throw pinto beans at you when you go over there where you want to go in the Army. He says, I know all about it. So I said, well, what's that got to do with that? Would you sign for me? He said, nope. So I said, okay, you don't want to sign for me? I'll accept that. Then I went to my grandmother, which also lived in Brownsville, Texas, and I asked her, will you sign for me? And she says, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go in the Army. And she says, sure, I'll sign for you. I says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I says, I'll send you $20 out of my salary every month, because the sergeant told me I could do that. She said, will you do that? I said, yeah. And it'll be sent to you by the government every month, allotment. That's what he called it. I said, and she said, well, I'll sign for you.
Well,
yes.
She signed for $20? Yes.
So the recruiter went with me, and he went and drove with me, and she signed, and I had to show him my birth certificate, and not my birth certificate, but my baptism certificate from Cuero, Texas. And he said, well, everything's in order. He said, he gave me the test, entrance exam, they call it. And I did my test, I passed it, and it wasn't more than a week later, they told me okay. And I went down to where the recruiter was, and there was a bunch of other guys there waiting. And they gave us all the paperwork. They gave us some tickets. We were going to go on the train from Brownsville, Texas, to San Antonio, Texas, where there was the, what they call it, well, they did the entrance there, you know. And so they put all this in an envelope, and the sergeant looked at me. He says, you're in charge. Here you go. I said, me? He said, yeah. And the rest of the guys looked, and they said, yeah. He says, you got your meal tickets and everything that we pay for. You're all going in the train, and they'll feed you there. I said, okay. So we took off. We had our little old bags with the civilian clothes we had. So they took us down to San Antonio, and when we got to San Antonio, there was a sergeant waiting for us with some buses. And we loaded on the buses, and we went on to the place that they did all the other examining and everything that they did for you. So after that, they said, you know, they gave us more tests. We took the tests. Then after that, they gave us a full examination of the body, and then they gave us some shots. We went on a line and gave us the shots, and we went on. And after that, they had this place where they held us for a day or two, and they fed us there. After that, they said, okay, now they gave me more tickets, and they said they put us in a train. After they took us to the, you know, in buses and let us on the train, and we went from San Antonio, Texas, to California.
Okay.
In the train. and they fed us there. You know, we had the tickets, and they put me in charge. I couldn't understand why. They just pick on me.
Oh, I know
But
why they put you in charge, because Pops is a really responsible person. They knew that from the very beginning, that you would not lose those tickets for all of your friends that were with you. So keep going. So you were on the train again.
Right, and we went on this train, and we went all the way from Texas, all the way down through New Mexico, Arizona, and on up to California. We seen a beautiful scenery down there, the Rockies and everything. That's the first time I've ever been out of Texas. And I thought it was beautiful. For me, it was just a great thing. We had a Pullman, you know, where you sleep, and we had the whole thing, you know. The government paid for it. So until we got to Fort Ord, California. Well, in California, we got to California, and when we got it at the station, they had some military trucks, 2.5-ton trucks, and they had a bunch of sergeants down there waiting, because it was not only us, it was a whole lot of other guys that were going in, you know, that they picked from several places. And when we got there, they had this line of trucks waiting, and these guys were all in gears, helmets on and everything. I said, what's going on here, huh? And I said, well, they started calling the names by the roll, and they told us, you get on this truck, you get on that truck. They had them all numbered up. So we all got in the trucks, and they took us to Fort Ord, California. And that's where I received my basic training with the 4th Infantry Division that had been in World War II, and it was a highly decorated division in World War II. And that's where I took the basic training, and they taught me all I had to. And the people that taught us, young troops, were the people that had experience in World War II. They had all served in World War II, and I mean, I give them full credit for me still being here alive.
Yep.
Because they taught us great, and they taught me great.
Yep.
And they were good guys.
Yep.
Even though they were rough on us, but they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I got my basic training. I got through basic.
Yeah.
And then they told us, you're going to Colorado, one whole regiment from the 4th Infantry Division. And they got us one regiment, and we went on to Colorado. I said to myself, what are we going to do in Colorado? Well, what it was, we were sent there to train how to fight in mountainous country.
Right.
And they had the mountain troops there to teach us. And they also had part of the Swiss Army came over to teach us how to climb rock, you know, with ropes and snaplings and all that, and how to descend from the rocks, and how to, they taught us well about the terrain. That's what it was, mostly, to learn the terrain. And we fought, we trained there during the spring and summer, and then the winter came in. That's the first time I ever seen snow. I never had seen snow as far as Brunswick is concerned, because that's right on the border of Mexico. But anyway, after we got completed there, then the whole regiment was called to go to Korea.
Right.
And this was in 1952. And after they got all the equipment and everything, they had this flat truck, train, well, the flat top loading.
Right.
And we loaded all the equipment from the regiment onto that. We worked day and night with floodlights on, loading up, and the whole unit was shipped over to Korea. Well, first when we loaded all that equipment and everything, and us troops, they put us on the train, and we went down to San Francisco, California, down at the port down there.
Mm-hmm.
And they put us, they separated us, a bunch of us, and they had several ships, and what they were using World War II merchant marine ships that they used in World War II.
Okay.
And I was lucky to get on the USS Jackson, which was a merchant marine ship. It had these big guns too. And we loaded that. I got on that, and we went from San Francisco, and we went over the Golden Gate Bridge. At that time, we knew where we were going. They done told us we were going to Korea because the Korean War was fighting over there now. They were already fighting with a few troops they had down there, plus the South Koreans. And they had been pushed all the way to Busan. But at that time, we didn't know that.
Right.
So as we went on the ship, the chaplain got up on top of the, whatever they call that bridge, where the admiral's at. And he came on a loudspeaker and he prayed. He prayed for all of us. We were all young, all volunteers. They didn't have no draft. We were all volunteers, volunteer army. And after he prayed for us, he said, as the ships were going underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, he said, okay, man, look at the lights. Look at the lights out there. Because it's going to be a long time before you see these lights again. He said, and I wish you all well,
Yeah.
and do a good job and all that, He just rubbed it on a little bit on us. And he said, and at the same time, guess what they played?
What?
On the ship, came through the speaker in the radio. I see the harbor lights. And I still remember that. That song was, I don't know if you knew that song or
Yeah.
not. But it was a popular song. And it just said, oh my God. We said, what have we done? I said to myself, what have I done? Here I am going, and I don't know what to expect. So we all got ready, and we kept going on. And we went to Hawaii.
Okay.
We landed in Hawaii. When we landed in Hawaii, they took us off the ship, and we went to Schofield Barracks. And there, they took all our gear that we had, garrison gear, and they gave us combat gear. And then they took us out to the rifle range, and we had to zero in our rifles, our weapons. And then they sharpened off our bayonets. And then we stayed there about a week. And in the mess hall, we ate off and on while we did all this. It took us a week. And then we went back to the ship again. I went back to USS Jackson. We had quite a few ships. I mean, it was like a
Yeah.
fleet, And I guess they had destroyers and stuff guarding them, And we took off from there. After we left there, I think we stayed there about 3 or 4 days. And of course, they gave us a briefing there, orientation, they call it. And the orientation was about the Koreans that we were going to fight. They showed us the uniforms that they wore, and the weapons they had, and they gave us a big spiel about it, And then they told us about the good conduct, or whatever they call it, combat conduct or something. I forgot what it was they call it. But anyway, we had to abide by it, about catching prisoners and all that,
Right.
not doing what they ain't supposed to do. But they did it anyway to us, but we didn't. We weren't supposed to do it to them, And we loaded up. After that, we loaded up on the ships, and we went over to going towards. We thought it was going to Korea. We didn't. We went to Japan.
Oh my.
They took us on our ships to Japan in those merchant marine ships. When we got in Japan, they unloaded us down there at Sasebo Harbor in Japan.
Okay.
And we all unloaded there. We ate there that evening. Next morning, they got us all up, and we loaded on Japanese boats from Japan. I'm telling you, I said, what's going on? And we got on these boats. They were not war boats. They were just transport boats, but they were Japanese. And we went inside, and they had these bunks. And what they had straw. And that's what we slept on, And I mean, they gave us a little. We had our own rations, sea rations, because they didn't cook for us. We had to eat our own stuff. And we went from Japan to South Korea. When we landed in South Korea, I guess they didn't want American ships knowing that we were going to come.
Uh-huh.
So we were going to reinforce the troops that had been pulled back into Busan. They almost went into the ocean. When we got down there, we started seeing all kinds of lights in the sky and things just blowing up, and we heard cannons going off, and I said, oh my. So we got off there, and when we got off there, they had more sergeants around there, and little, all kinds of trucks and all kinds of gear and all that, and then they separated us into groups, and I was fortunate. They said, okay, I was in the group that was being assigned. We were replacements for the guys that they had lost.
Gotcha.
So they put me with this group called the 5th. I was going to be assigned to the 5th Regimental Infantry Combat Team. And it turned out that I was lucky. I went to a good regiment. I mean, And I mean, they were all good, but this was well known. I didn't know at that time until I started serving in it. And from there, we loaded up on these trucks, and they took us up to where the battlefield was going on. And I mean to tell you, as we went, and we started going up, we passed all these little towns and stuff. There was destruction. It was flattened out. There was nothing much there, And I seen some of them poor civilians, and rags and stuff, and South Koreans, And we went, and we went up to where the lines were at, holding back the North Koreans, because the Chinese hadn't come in yet. It was the North Koreans. So we went up to the hills there. Well, it was not mountains. They were sort of like slopes. That's where they were at. They were short from being pushed into the sea. And we got there, and we started, some of us guys, as we started moving into the trenches with all the barbed wire and all that, they started sending artillery and mortar rounds into that area. And some of us guys didn't even get to see the first day of combat. I remember that. And we ducked, and we'd hear those things coming, and they tell us to duck, and we ducked. And we went into the trenches, Of course, we had our cadre too, them guys that taught us. They went with us. They fought in World War II. They were fighting in Korea too. And we went into the trenches and that. And that's where it started all, From then on, we pushed on, and it was a hard time going up the hills, up the slopes and stuff. But we started pushing, and General MacArthur at that time was our commanding general of the forces, and I went all the way with our unit, and we had other units on the right flank and the left flank, and we had one unit was 2nd Infantry Division on the left, and we had another unit on the right, and we had the Rock Army. That was the South Korean army, you know, that American troops had taught how to fight, and we just kept on moving, and we had air support with them small planes coming in from the aircraft carriers, and we just moved we took a little bit at a time, and it took us months and months, and we got some wounded and killed, and we just kept on going, and it was a struggle all the way until we got down to the Yellow River, which there was China border. We drove the North Koreans all the way up there. We pushed them. Took several. It took, I forgot how many. I can't tell you what the area was when we did, because I don't forgot all that. But it took us a long time to get there, but we pushed. What happened there was they also had more troops come in the Incheon, and they came from the north. And what they did, they pushed some of the North Koreans down towards the center, and we pushed this way. We pushed forward from the south to the north, and we encircled them like, and we caught a bunch of Chinese prisoners, and believe me or not, they also had women.
Wow. They
had combat women in their forces. We captured some of them too. And we had heavy casualties. We had to fight the numbers then too, but when we got down to the Chinese border, down to the reservoir, it was at that time, winter was there, and it was very hard. I mean, you know, winter was, and we got soaked, and then it would freeze, and icicles would hang down our helmets, and it was just hard. A lot of the guys got trench food, lost their toes, and I got frostbite myself in my hands, my ears, and my feet almost went to that. But a buddy of mine told me, he says, "Let me see your feet." I told him, "I don't feel my bottom of my feet." He says, "You're getting trench foot. Let me see them." And I took my boots off, and he looked at them, and they were already turning a little pink with little yellow spots on it. You know, that was the first signs of trench foot. And he grabbed one foot and took my sock off, and grabbed the other one, took my sock off, and he opened his jacket, and he put one field jacket, and put one in his arm, and put the other one in my arm, under his armpits. And I mean to tell you, it hurt so bad I started crying when they started thawing out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he saved my feet.
He did.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And he was my buddy, old Frenchie. I still remember him. He was my guy that was next to me on the trenches, because I had a BAR, Brownie automatic rifle. It shot 20 rounds at one time, shoot. And that was it. I mean, you know, and he was my rifleman on my side, because my BAR automatic rifle was like a machine gun, you know. But, you know.
Right.
And he was, and he also carried a whole bunch of grenades just in case, you know. And that's the way we fought. We fought together, you know, all through us. Frenchie was good. He was from Louisiana. That's why I called him Frenchie. He knew French. Yeah. He knew French too. I mean, he could speak French too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was a good guy. And then I had another buddy named Sweet, and he was an African American guy, and he was a good guy. At that time I was a corporal. I was a squad leader. I had my own squad, and all through that period of time, I led my squad, and I was in charge of the squad, and I lost a few of my squad people, and then I get some more replacements. And then on one patrol, when we went up north, like I said, when we was up there by the reservoir, I lost more of my people. And we lost our platoon sergeant, assistant platoon sergeant. We lost our officers. We got hit by the Chinese. That's when the Chinese crossed over.
Yeah.
And we lost them. We were really low on personnel in our battalion and company. So what happened to me is they all of a sudden they came and says,
You're in charge.
You're in charge. I said, what?
Happened
Yeah,
again.
you're in charge, man. You're a platoon sergeant. I said, oh, God. He said, yeah, you'll take care of this little group of guys you got here, and you got it. I said, my, here I am, not old enough to know nothing. Oh, man. So I was in charge then, and they gave me the stripes, and I said, okay. So we started going out. I had my own little platoon. We started building up with more replacements. As some got wounded, they sent me more, and we started doing. And I had my missions to do, so we did them, and we'd go on recon and find out where the enemy was, and we'd come back, and then sometimes we had to go and scout and see where they were, and we'd shoot at them or shoot around to find out exactly where they were, and they would shoot back, and we find out where they were. So that's the way we did. And then when we ever got attacked, the way the Chinese did, they fought different than the North Chinese. They would come in waves when they come down the mountains. There we were in the mountains, way up in the mountains, and they would have one wave, two waves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 waves of Chinese on waves, coming up to take over, and we would, how we started doing it, what saved us was we had the firepower. We'd put all the people in the rifle, and our infantry, we'd have it all in the trenches up there, and they would put these sticks down for us, and say, okay, you cover this area right here. Just when they come, just start shooting. You don't even have to aim. Just shoot low around ankle high or knee high, and then they would bring in the quads, which was anti-aircraft 50 calibers, tractors, and they would go on top of the hill, and then they would bring up the artillery and the tanks. So when they'd come in, all that would go on, and you'd see at night or early in the morning, that's when they hit us, early in the morning before it started getting daylight, and the whole thing would open up, and you would look, and it looked like the 4th of July, like it does here. When you see the 4th of July, the whole sky would light up. And I mean to tell you, it was just an experience to see. And then next morning, we had to get all our people up. We didn't have no body bags like we had in Vietnam. We had our ponchos to pick up our people in, and we had also some mattresses that we put in, because we didn't have no, like they did in Vietnam.
So
no
in the
body
Caribbean,
bags.
you had to pick up the bodies.
Right, bodies and parts. Well, I just don't. I still remember that.
Well, I can imagine.
That's why I get this post-traumatic stress, I guess.
Yeah.
I talk very little about combat.
Yeah.
I talk about other things, about being in the service.
Right.
Combat was just too much.
It's a lot.
But anyway,
Pops, it's a lot.
but anyway, I served there till, in 52. I served about 12 months, and I came back to the States.
Part of the questions that you're asked to visit when you're visiting with a veteran for the Voices Oral History Center, there's a few questions that we didn't quite cover. So, Daddy, I want to ask you: I know that you told me that you had other guys. You called one Frenchie, and you had a guy that was an African American that was also a good friend of yours. A good, yeah. Were there several other Latino and African American officers with you?
No, not in Korea.
Not in Korea at all.
I was the only
You were the only one.
Latino.
Okay, and then how did you get along with the Korean people?
Well, I would say I didn't get to see much of the Korean people.
Because you were busy.
So it was in the battlefield.
Yeah, there wasn't any chit-chatting going on.
No villages. I mean, we didn't go through villages. We had lines.
Right, it was straight battle. How did the other troops in your unit feel about or get along with the native population?
I guess they got all right. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Why do you think that the U.S. was involved in Korea?
The U.S. got involved in Korea. Partly, I guess, because we had troops stationed in South Korea to train their soldiers, to train their army.
Right.
Yeah, we were occupational force. Was the 10th Infantry Division.
Yeah.
I even remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That was there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones that got hurt and pushed back. But I don't know the real tactical reason.
Right.
But it's why the United States went into war with Korea.
What awards, citations, or commendations did you receive for your services in Korea?
I reserved the. I got the Korean citation. I got the Korean National Ribbon. I got the UN Nation Ribbon. Let me see. That's South Korean. That's the UN ribbon, and I had, that's about it.
Okay. How were you treated by the community and your family when you came back to the States?
From Korea.
Yeah.
It was pretty good. We was pretty good. I'd go to the bar and get me a drink then. I mean, I wasn't old enough, but they give me a drink anyway. Give me a beer, just a beer.
Yeah. What do you think and feel about your service as a Latino in Korea?
I felt, yeah. At that time, I was too young to think about it. When I served, I just felt like, I did my job.
Right.
That's
Exactly. What do you think and feel about the U.S. participation in the Korean War or in other countries?
Well, after I came back from Korea, I re-enlisted and I became a career soldier. So to me, it was a job.
And it was important to you?
It was important. It meant something to me.
Yeah. Do you suffer from any disabilities because of the Korean War?
Yes, I do. Quite a few. All service connected. I'm 100% disabled, according to the VA.
Okay. Do you believe the government took care of its troops in Korea?
Well, yeah, they did the best they could under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Because the weather was bad. It was hard places to get to. It wasn't easy to get to.
It sounds terrible with icicles hanging on your helmet.
Yes, and not only that, but the food we didn't get no hot food. Very seldom we got. Mostly we lived in rations. See, rations, the old rations they had in World War II, and that's about it. You know, and we were short on ammo. We were short on ammo sometimes. And it scared us to be short on ammo.
You know, it would scare me too. I don't want to be short on ammo ever. How do you feel about the way that the veterans are treated today?
Well, some complained about not being treated properly. I myself believe that the VA is doing all they can do with what they get from our government.
What do you call it up in here? Hold on.
From our government.
There you go.
And that's it. I mean, you know, I myself have no real complaints about
how they treat them. How they treat all of our veterans.
Right.
What was it difficult for you to adjust to life back in the United States when you came back?
It was for me. It was because I was a career soldier. You know, it was hard for me to adapt to civilian life again because all I knew from when I went in so young, that was
Your way of life.
That was my way of life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, so I got used to being in the service and being there, you know.
How did the war affect your life, do you think?
The war affected my life in different ways. I learned a lot from it, good and bad. But in a way, it just, you know, the memories that I have, I feel guilt. That's what I feel. I feel guilt because I went into leadership very young and inexperienced. And I tried to do my best.
And you did.
To save.
And I want you to know that you did.
Save my troops. But you can't help but to lose some. And sometimes I blame myself for that.
No, I want you to not do that, okay?
But
I know. I love you. It's not easy at all. Well, would you change anything else about your Korean War experience if you could?
no, I wouldn't do it no different.
No.
I'd do the same thing over again.
Now, you already told me that your daddy was in the military. Is there any other members of your family in the military? And how did you feel about this? So let me ask you this. If one of our 5 grandsons decided that they wanted to go into the military, what would you tell them?
I tell them to go to college first.
Exactly.
And then make their own decision.
Give them a little time.
Right. Get some time.
Get a little
Education
time.
comes first. That's what I wanted. I wanted education. But my parents didn't have the money to send me to college at that time, or to school. I mean, finish school.
Right, for sure. I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you ever been diagnosed or treated for post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yes, I'm being treated now.
Right. And how are you coping?
There's times that I do okay, but then there's times that I get anxiety and I get these panic attacks.
Right.
That's why I take Xanax.
Right.
It's a drug to calm me down.
Have you joined any other organizations after the war, like the LULAC or the AGIF or the American Legion or the VFW?
None of them.
Okay.
I try to stay away from that.
What do you think the war has had an effect on the Latino community? Like, what ways, or are there any difficulties that remain, or do you think that, what are your thoughts about that?
About how Latinos feel towards being in the service.
Yeah.
Well, I myself, I think that some of them volunteer, for certain reasons.
Right.
But mostly probably is because in some cases they can't find a job. I don't know how it is today, but that's the way it was when I volunteered.
Yeah, that's the way it was. From your life experience, is there any stories about the Korean War that hasn't been told or you feel was not told correctly or accurately?
No, the ones that I've heard and the ones that I've read, they're pretty accurately.
Good. And what advice do you give to future Latinos listening to this interview?
My advice is not just to the Latinos, but the general young guys, is go to school, finish your school first, get educated, and after that, then it's up to you to decide whether you want to serve or not. But I learned a lot. Like my dad told me, they didn't throw beans at me.
And he was correct.
And he was right. He knew it all. He went through all of it.
Yeah.
Seen a lot of it too.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for your service, Pops.
Yeah, welcome.
I love you.
I love you too.
I hope you guys have found some value in this interview. Please do me a favor, like and share, comment below. I just love him so much. There's so much to learn from our veterans and so much respect that needs to be given. So we'll see you soon.